Okay, so these are my controller settings for the Black Ops 6 beta, and these are the settings that I'll be using for this weekend as a 5 KD player in Warzone. Now to start this off, we're actually going to go into the movement tab. Now, the big difference in this game versus the current state of Warzone is we have omnidirectional movement, which basically means that we can sprint in all different directions with our character. So you can sprint left, right, forward, backwards, and this allows us to do a lot of advanced movement in this game. And this first setting in the movement tab is the sprint assist. And I have this set to tactical sprint assist. And what this means is that basically it's similar to the auto tac sprint, where I do not have to press a button to start sprinting in the direction that I want to sprint. So for instance, if I were to turn this off, when I run forward, I don't start sprinting until I hit my sprint button. And having this set to tactical sprint assist just saves me one extra button press, and it just increases the life of my controller because I don't have to mash my sprint button every couple of seconds. Now, what's really important with this setting is that when you go to the show more section, you want to make sure that your sprint assist delay is set all the way down to 0. If I increase this value, basically it just starts a timer and sets an amount of time before your character actually starts sprinting. So when I have that set to the maximum, if I go forward on my left analog stick, there's a delay between when I start sprinting, and same thing if I go backwards. So you want to set that down to 0 so that you start sprinting immediately when you're moving in a different direction. And for these next two settings, you want to make sure that they're also turned on because you want to be able to sprint in all different directions, sideways and backwards. And if you basically turn the setting off, for instance, in the sideways direction, well, now my character just won't sprint when I'm going sideways unless I hit my sprint button. And like I said, I just want to minimize my button presses, so I have these two settings turned on. Now, the next setting is the Mantle Assist, and I have this turned off. And very simply, I want to have full control over my character, and I don't want my character to just randomly mantle objects in the middle of a gunfight while I'm doing movement. Because if I have this turned on, basically, if I run into an object that I can mantle, my character will just go right into that animation, and that will typically mess you up in a gunfight. So I like to have this turned off, because if I want to mantle something, I just want to be in full control over whether I do that or not. So I have this turned off, and you can see here that if I do actually want to mantle something, you know, I can just basically hit my jump button and then mantle the object. And this show more just gives you some additional settings for controlling like the directions that you mantle. And once again, I have all these turned off just so that I have full control over my character. Okay, the next setting is crouch assist, and I also have this turned off. Basically, if you have it turned on, it will essentially activate a crouch, I believe, when you go towards like valid openings on the map. So I don't want my character to do that, so I have it turned off. Okay, and then for the automatic airborne mantle, once again, I have that turned off for the same reason as before, in that I don't want to accidentally mantle things during a gunfight. The mantling animations in this game are really slow, and if you get stuck in one of those, you will typically lose a gunfight. So I just want to make sure that that is off. Now, this next setting is extremely important. So for this game, we have the omnidirectional movement in all the different directions, but one big thing with this game is we can now shoot during dives. So you can dive in all different directions, but what's really interesting about this game is you can dive and shoot your gun while you're diving, which makes this movement actually usable in a gunfight. You want to be able to slide and dive, and on controller, that's a little bit tricky because these two actions are typically tied to one button. So I have this set to hybrid so that when I'm holding my sprint button and then I press my slide button, my character dives. And this just gives me a lot of control over my character. These other settings, the tap to slide and the tap to dive, the problem with those is that you have to hold a button down to do the movement. And whenever you have to hold a button down, it just makes the timings of the button presses a little bit weird and difficult to do in a gunfight. And also, the time to kill in this game is very fast. So you don't want to have to hold down a button to do a movement on the map because you're probably going to get slammed. So I have it set to hybrid so that I'm able to basically slide and dive at will, based on, what I need to do in the game. Okay, the auto door peek I have turned off. With this turned on, your character will just automatically peek as you go to ADS, which I just don't want that because there are probably scenarios where I would not want to do that. So I just want to have control over it. Okay, so moving on to the movement advanced settings tab. For this first movement behavior here, the sprint behavior, I have this set on toggle. It doesn't really matter for me because I'm using the tactical sprint assist, which is kind of like our auto tac sprint. But if you aren't using that, essentially this is either set your sprint button to toggle or hold. I think for most people, you would want to press toggle so you don't have to hold a button the entire time that you would want to sprint. Auto move forward, make sure that this is turned off. If you put it like on single tap, basically if you just tap your left analog stick forward, you're just going to go into a sprint, which is not good. Make sure that that is turned off. Grounded mantle, once again off. I don't want to mantle things on accident, so that is off. The sprint restore, this is very important. You want to make sure that this is on. And this allows you to basically resume sprinting after you do movement actions on the map without having to basically hit your sprint button again. So this will save you some button presses. Okay, so for this next setting, the slide maintain sprint, I'm playing with this turned on, and basically this allows you to continue to sprint after performing a slide. And with movement, you definitely don't want to have delays when you're moving around the map. So I had this turned on so that I can sprint immediately after a slide. So that is on. Tactical sprint behavior. This once again doesn't really matter because I'm using the auto attack sprint, but I have it set single tap to sprint. Okay, and then for plunging underwater, I have this set to trigger. I think with auto attack sprint, it basically is the same thing, because with the trigger, basically when you sprint, you can look down to go into the water, where with free, you can look down and move forward and plunge into the water. I think it's basically the same thing, but I actually go up and down in the water by using my change stance button. So it doesn't really matter for me, but I have it set to trigger. And then this last setting here, the sprinting door bash, you want to make sure that's turned on. If you have it turned off, basically when you run into a door, you're just going to get stuck on the door, which isn't good, because if you're getting chased or something like that, you don't want to get stuck and have to interact with the door. So I have that turned on. Okay, the vehicle advanced settings, I'm just going to skip because there aren't any vehicles to my knowledge in the beta. Then moving over to the combat section, aim down sight, I have it on hold. Weapon mounting, I have it just on ADSing and melee. That is definitely a personal preference though. The quick C4 detonation, I have it on groups, so I can throw more than one C4 at a time. The equipment behavior, once again, I like to use that on hold. I like to hold down my tactical or lethal button as opposed to just using the toggle button. I think that hold just feels more natural. For pistols and guns that are like single shot or manual fire, I have it on press, which means that basically you have to continuously press the button for a shot. So for instance, with this pistol, you know, when I hit my fire button, the pistol is going to shoot, versus if you have it set to hold, you can just hold down your button and it will shoot, but it's going to be a little bit slower for a lot of guns. So I would highly recommend to have this on press. Okay, so for the change D-pad up behavior, I have it set to ping. Okay, and the change zoom activation, this just sets if you're using a gun that has multiple zooms, basically what button affects that setting. I have mine set to sprint. Okay, so for the weapon mount exit, I have it turned off. This is a little bit of a personal preference. Basically, you can set it so that if it's turned on with the instant or short delay, where if you're mounted and you try to move in a direction, your character will get off of the mount. But I just have it turned off so that I can have control over, you know, when I mount or get off. So I just have it off. The interact reload behavior, I have this on tap to reload because in multiplayer, oftentimes there's a lot of guns and things like that on the ground, and I don't want to accidentally pick anything up, you know, when I'm trying to fight someone. So because this is not Warzone, where you have to, you know, pick a lot of things up and loot and stuff like that, I have it on tap to reload and then hold to interact. Sprint cancels reload, I have that turned off so that I don't like interrupt my reload sequence on accident with the sprint. The ADS stick swap, I recommend this being off. Basically, if you have it on, when you ADS, it will switch what stick is doing what, which is just very, very bizarre. So I definitely recommend that being turned off. Depleted ammo weapon switch, I have that turned off as well because I want to have full control over when I swap my weapons. If you have this turned on, when you run out of ammo and your gun, it will automatically switch, which I do not like. Core streaks reordering, I have it on numerical order, which I think is just personal preference. Dedicated melee weapon behavior, this is really interesting. So in this game, basically your character has a primary and a secondary weapon, but you also have a melee weapon, and this setting right here dictates how you get to your melee, and I have this on hold. So basically my weapon swaps between my two weapons, but then when I hold my melee, that's where I get my knife. And then if I hit weapon swap again, I go back to my weapons. That's how it works best for me right now. I still think it feels a little bit clunky, and I'm not sure if they're going to change this at some point or if there's going to be a better way to do it, because the other option they give you is not very good in my opinion. Basically, if you put it on weapon cycle, you can cycle through your weapons, and your melee is going to be like the third weapon in your weapon cycle, and I don't like that because, you know, in a high pressure intense situation, I want to be able to get between my secondary between my primary and secondary guns as fast as possible, and I don't want to get into a melee situation. And then swap body shield and execution behavior. I think this is just a personal preference, and I have it turned off. Okay, so moving on to the overlay behaviors for the scoreboard, maps, and stats. I have this just set to toggle, so I don't have to hold the button down. For the overlay advanced settings, ping wheel delay, I have that set to the longest so that I don't accidentally pull up this wheel when I'm pressing like my ping button. Double tap danger ping delay. This sets the length of time between two presses between your ping and your danger ping. I have this set to moderate. I haven't really played around with it too much, but this seems to work. And then the wheeled behavior, I just have this set to hold, so that I hold down this button to like keep the wheels active versus toggling it. I think that just feels more natural for me. Okay, so moving on to the controller and aiming tabs. Okay, so for the button layout, this is going to be very personal to your play style and what type of controller you're using, and if you have back buttons or if you play claw. And essentially what you want for these settings is you want to minimize the amount of times that you're moving your thumbs off of your analog sticks. For me, I play with a controller with 4 back buttons, and I have my my jump, my slide, and then my reload and interact on 3 of the paddles. And the last paddle, I'm actually, for this beta, I'm testing out using it as my sprint button. And why I like that is because with this game, it's going to require you to press your sprint button like quite a bit. And what I've found is that if you have a button on your analog stick on like your L3 or R3, you tend to wear that analog stick out very quickly. But all in all, it's really just personal preference and what works for you. You might be thinking, okay, well, how do you do your weapon swap? And I actually use my L2 button for that, which is a little bit weird. But it just works for me. Like I said, it's all personal preference with button settings, and you just want to make sure that you're moving your thumbs off your analog sticks as little as possible. Okay, stick sensitivity. I play on 8/8, and this is once again going to be personal preference and going to depend on if you use a control freak or what type of controller you use. If you're having trouble with your stick sensitivity, I typically recommend being in the 6 to like 10 range for most people. And how to find this sensitivity is what I like to do is basically you want to make sure in Call of Duty that you have good centering, which is basically your crosshair placement or control. You want to be able to put your crosshair where you expect enemies to be on the map. And what's tricky about that is you have to be able to do it without any aim assist. So what I like to do is I like to just like get into a map and essentially just find a window, and I will just practice doing basically like 90-degree turns and practice doing 180-degree turns. And I just want to make sure that I have a lot of control over my character. I want to make sure that, I'm not like wildly, moving around and, like looking like this, right? Or if I'm turning left here, like I want to make sure that I'm not like massively overshooting or undershooting my target. So I'll just practice doing these 90-degree turns and these 180-degree turns. And I just recommend you find a sensitivity where you can spin around very comfortably and accurately. The simplified controls, I have that turned off so that I have more basically control over my button bindings and stuff. I think that makes sense to turn it off. Low motor strain, I also have it turned off because once again, I want to have control over my inputs. And then for bumper ping, I have this turned off. This basically just inverts your tactical and ping buttons, and I personally don't like that. Controller vibration, I have it turned off. I actually have the rumbles removed from my controller, but I have it turned off. The trigger effect, I also have it turned off. If you have it on, you can get like that haptic feedback and stuff like that if your controller has it, but I don't want any sort of vibrations or motion of my controller. Okay, so for my dead zones, this is very important. So I play with both my left and right sticks at the minimum. And the reason I do that, especially for the right stick, is that I don't mind if I have a little bit of stick drift, because I want my controller to be as responsive as possible. And as soon as I press my analog stick, I want my aim to start moving. And basically, you can think of your dead zones as like the threshold for when your controller is going to start registering your input from your thumb. For instance, if you crank this number up, I have to move my analog stick a lot more to actually get an input versus if I had this down lower. Even though you might get a little bit of stick drift, I personally don't mind having that because I would prefer to have more control over my crosshair and be able to make these little micro adjustments with my thumb. Okay, and so for the left stick max, I set this to 65. And the theory behind this is that since I have automatic tack sprint turned on, basically it requires like less input to get into a sprint using my left analog stick. And in theory, that just helps you basically get into a sprint and be a little bit quicker on the map when you're making different movements. So I think setting this to 65 is a good value. Okay, and so for the right stick max, I have this set to 99, just so I have the full range of motion of the analog stick, which makes sense. And then for the left and right triggers, I have this set down to 0 because I don't want there to be any delay from when I press a trigger button and the gun actually shooting. Okay, moving over to the aiming tab for the sensitivity multiplier, I have everything set to 1 aside from the ADS sensitivity multiplier. This is set to 0.8. And basically, this just reduces your sensitivity when you're aimed down sight. I find that having this on 0.85 allows me to have a little bit more control over my aim when I'm in a close range gunfight. Okay, and then so for look inversion, I have this set to standard because I don't want to play on inverted where basically it changes like your up and down for your analog stick, and that just feels very, very bizarre. So I have that set on standard. Once again, for the look inversion, both are just set to standard. Okay, and then so for the ADS sensitivity transition timing, I have this set to instant so that when I ADS down sight, my ADS multiplier kicks in immediately. I just find that this makes the most sense and is just the most consistent for my aim. The aim response curve type, I use dynamic. This is once again going to be a little bit of a personal preference. I would recommend using what you are currently using in Warzone, but you can definitely play around with this. There are very good players on pretty much all three. I think that dynamic is probably the most popular overall. I have the aim response curve slope set to 1. It just sets the effectiveness of your curve type. I've never really played around with this, but 1 just feels really good. I don't use any custom sensitivity like zooms. So for like snipers and stuff like that, I just have everything set to 1. Obviously, I play with aim assist turned on. So make sure that's turned on. And then this motion sensor, I believe is like your gyro aim, which is getting some popularity in gaming, but I don't use that. You can look it up if you're interested in gyro aiming, but I have this turned off. And those are my settings for the Black Ops 6 beta weekend. They might change around a little bit, but these should give people a good starting point to enjoy the weekend. I'm going to be working a lot on learning the movement for this game, and hopefully we'll have a little bit of like a basic kind of movement guide later this weekend, so stay tuned for that. And let me know in the comments if that's something you'd be interested in. Hope you guys have a good rest of your day and enjoy the beta weekend.